Should taxpayer money be used to fund open source projects, foundations, and corporations? This is happening quite a lot, perhaps more than people realize. Mozilla, F-Droid, Let's Encrypt, Tor, it's all recently come out that they receive a huge amount of money from U.S. taxpayers. Money that nobody voted for these organizations to receive. No one chose, like I didn't choose. No taxpayer said, I want my money to go to these sets of open source projects. But bureaucrats decided that they were going to collect taxpayer money from people, essentially at gunpoint, and then distribute them to open source projects. For example, Mozilla receives millions of dollars from USAID and spent it on social and political training, centering marginalized groups and engaging race, gender, and sexuality perspectives. Tor, the Onion router, the F-Droid Android App Store, and Let's Encrypt, which provides SSL certificates and is a certificate authority, they also bring in a tremendous amount of money from taxpayers via what's known as the Open Technology Fund. This is a thing it's happening all over the place. And I don't know that people fully realize it. I don't know if people realize that things like F-Droid are funded by U.S. taxpayers. So that poses the question, should they be? Right? And so I asked this. I posted a poll over on X just because that's the most scientific thing in the world to do. And I said, should F-Droid, an alternative open source Android app store, receive $400,000 from U.S. taxpayers? That was the full question, yes or no? Because that's what was happening. They were set to receive this year $400,000 from U.S. taxpayers via the Open Technology Fund, which is all U.S. taxpayer money. And again, no one voted. There was no ballot anywhere that said, I want to fund F-Droid, right? So we don't get a say in the matter. It just is happening. And by and large, people said no. 74% of respondents said no, that should not happen. F-Droid should not receive $400,000 from U.S. taxpayers. 26% of people said yes. So the question is should it though? Should this sort of thing be happening? One other poll that got put up, and after I put this poll up, about an hour or 2 hours later, Andreas Kling posted a similar poll, because I think, this got him thinking as well. Andreas Kling is the creator of Serenity OS and the Ladybird web browser. And he posted this, different wording, same kind of idea. Quote, should taxpayers fund independent software development to reduce dependence on big tech? End quote. Right now, he's taking a very different stance on it, right? He's putting a different spin on it. He's putting the positive spin on it. He's not saying, should you spend this exact amount of money on this exact project? He's saying, just in general, should taxpayers fund independent software development to reduce our dependence on big tech? And who doesn't like the idea of reducing our dependence on big tech, right? Right? And in a general idea, I think a lot more people are more open to the idea of funding independent software development, right? But even then, even in even when asking this question to an entirely different audience from my own, most people said no, this shouldn't be happening. Now it was a lot closer. The no was 51.9% versus yes 48.1%. So it's a less than 4-point difference there. But still, distinctly no, it shouldn't be happening. And I think it's worth noting that the people that we're asking these polls of are very open source heavy, right? People who like open source, who like free software, people who, in a lot of cases, are contributors to open source and free software, either by source code or testing or part of the project or monetarily. So these are people who are more likely to say, yeah, let's fund open source. Now, in my case, my audience is a bit conservative leaning, and conservative leaning folks are probably going to go, you know what, we don't need to be spending taxpayer funds on things like this, right? We'd be more likely to say, let's find a free market way to make this happen. But Andreas Kling's audience is less so, right? And it has a big audience. A lot of people have been following his work in open source software for years. And even then, they were like, nah, we don't need to use taxpayer money for this. And I think this is something that's really worth considering because it's happening a great deal. How should these open source projects be funded? And should taxpayer funding be part of that? Now, for me personally, I'm not necessarily opposed to taxpayer funding going to these projects, but if that is the case, I'd like to get a say in the matter. I'd like to be able to vote with the people in my community to say, how is our taxpayer money to be spent? And if we say no, we don't want it to be spent on an alternative open source Android app store, well, then it's not. Right? Now, here's the thing. I like alternative open source app stores. F-Droid, as an example, has some issues with it from a technical design decisions, has some security issues. The people that run it have made some very dubious choices. So I don't know that I would feel comfortable donating my money to F-Droid specifically. But as taxpayers, U.S. taxpayers, we're giving $400,000, or we were scheduled to F-Droid this year. But me personally, I would probably be more likely to donate or contribute to a different open source app store or package management system or the like. And I think that's what it really comes down to is in the case of the various pieces of software, whether they're talking about Mozilla or Tor or F-Droid or Let's Encrypt or any of the other ones, we're really saying that people are being forced because they legally have to pay the taxes, which that money is then going to these projects. People do not have a choice in the matter. And I think that that's really what it comes down to. And in a very real sense, you could say that they're being forced to pay money to F-Droid or Tor at gunpoint, right? Because if they don't pay their taxes, they're gonna get in trouble, right? The law is coming for them. But the only way to not give money to these organizations is to not pay the taxes. That's the only way. And so we have seen some efforts been going on right now where organizations are being, I don't want to say defunded, but the federal government is no longer going to be funding specific types of projects, the Doge sort of things. And we're seeing a lot of pushback on that from those who were very politically leftist within the open source world. But then you really start to look into it and you start to realize really quickly that those people in the open source world that are pushing back on Doge or Elon Musk being involved in cutting government spending and waste are also involved, sometimes directly, in the open source projects, foundations, and companies that are receiving that government taxpayer money. And the more you start to look into it, the more your eyebrows start to cock up a little bit. You know what I mean? Like it raises red flags. It doesn't look like people are being, it looks like people are fighting for their own interests, right? These open source organizations, they really want this taxpayer money. I understand. Couple $100,000, that's sweet, baby. I get it. I get why F-Droid or Let's Encrypt or Tor or Mozilla would like that. And Mozilla has been very, very clear. They are not fans of Trump or conservatives or Republicans. And I think I understand why. The Trump and the conservatives and the Elons and the Republicans are looking at taking away their money. That's happening with Tor and F-Droid and Let's Encrypt and all the rest. So is this something that should be happening? I think is a fair question to ask. And I think I'd say flat out no. No. The answer is clearly no. The taxpayer funding, the taxpayer money should not be going towards these open source projects. I think this is something that we need to be critical about. And I'm continuing to look into all of this, a number of other projects that are receiving this funding, and a number of other projects, companies, and foundations that are intertwined with the companies that are receiving funding, and really seeing where a lot of those ulterior motives are in and among these open source projects. I think it's worth noting. And part of this goes beyond just where's my money going, right? Me being able to have a say over where my money goes. It goes a little bit further than that. From a real practical standpoint, for example, if you have an app store like F-Droid, do you want 99% of the funding coming from one specific government? Can you imagine what the issues with that might be? I can think of a few, and they're not great. How about Tor? The onion router network, right? The whole point of that is that it helps to anonymize things. It helps to keep identities secret. Well, what happens when a pretty significant chunk of that money, and most of it does, comes from the United States government? What happens then? What are they likely to do? Because if they don't do whatever the government tells them to do, they're going to lose their funding, right? So, yeah. Instantly red flags go up. Instantly red flags go up. The same is true. What about Let's Encrypt? The value of an SSL certificate really rests in how much we trust the issuing certificate authority, right? If you don't have trust in the certificate authority, that deeply and quickly erodes any value of the SSL certificate itself. There's all sorts of issues that can come out with that. Well, what happens when Let's Encrypt is closely tied with multiple NGOs and is funded by the United States government from taxpayer money? And what if that funding gets threatened to be pulled away if they don't do what is requested of them? Well, now, do you trust them as a certificate authority? No, of course not. No, it doesn't matter how much you like whatever government is funding them. It can be the nicest government on earth. It can be your favorite government. But if a government is mostly funding them, do you trust that certificate authority? No, and you shouldn't. And this sort of thing goes on and on. Same is true with web browsers and everything else. I would posit that no, we need to get government funding as far away from our open source projects as is humanly possible. Please, for the love of all that is holy. And it warms my heart that most of you appear to strongly agree with that. I also want to thank all the Lunduke Journal subscribers for being awesome. And going to lunduke.com and clicking on all these links right there. All sorts of places to watch and listen and interact and read and become a whistleblower and all sorts of stuff and support the Lunduke Journal. It's all right there. It's all possible because of you. And with that, by the way, Lunduke Journal doesn't take any money from big tech companies or organizations or governments, right? The Open Tech Fund has never given me a penny. And if they did, I would turn it down, because that's what the Lunduke Journal do. Thank you for making that possible. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.